The universe is not deterministic. It is not chaotic. It is not predestined, predetermined, or patterned. The universe is not computational. It's not algorithmic. It can be a bitch, but if you want to know what science is really telling us about the true nature of the universe, you're going to have to watch the video. Come on. Okay, so here's the part of the series on free will all my loyal viewers have been waiting for. That's right, all three of you. In this video, we are going to show how determinism, which likes to masquerade as a scientific idea, is actually just a philosophy, a bad one, and at worst, a religion. And then we're going to show what science is really showing us about the nature of the universe. For those of you here for the first time, this is part 3 of a series on free will. You don't have to watch the first 2 to follow this video. But if you care about this subject and you're not just here to fill your nightly troll tank for intellectual shit posting, I do recommend that you go back and watch the other 2 after this one. So with all good debates, and I say this often on my channel, we need to start by defining terms. So we're going to begin by covering what exactly determinism is, where it comes from, and then we'll move on to the scientific case against it. Let's get going. The current debate around free will and determinism really falls along kind of a spectrum. No, that's too happy. Let's try something a little less. There we go. All right. It starts with what is called libertarianism. So we're at the very top, the most free will, and it basically means that we are free to do whatever we want without any overly repressive influences or things that are determining our lives for us. I mean, other than the obvious, we are free to live our lives however we wish and express our will in the world. At the bottom of the list, we have nihilism, the idea that the universe is a cold, indifferent, unfeeling place that is a complete accident of causality, doomed to end in coldness and rendering all life and struggle absolutely meaningless. Now, as with most things, determinism actually tends to fall more along a standard distribution. Most people don't sit at either of these extremes, and I just want to be very clear about that. So let's talk about what's more in the middle. So right under libertarianism, we have compatibilism, and this is the idea that determinism is real, but free will can still exist too somehow. And there's many different flavors of this, and it's often where people pull in the whole quantum mechanics thing. It's kind of like a philosophical Baskin and Robbins with 31 different flavors to choose from. Just below compatibilism, we have indifferent or soft determinism. Don't laugh, it's what happens to philosophers as they get old. Soft determinism is basically that yes, determinism is a real legitimate thing, but it doesn't impact our daily lives or ability to take responsibility for our actions, and it doesn't have any greater implications, and I'm just going to not think about it very hard. And then at the peak, we have hard determinism, which of course is preferred more by the younger crowd because they get more excited about this kind of thing. Now, hard determinism is the idea that everything is just this long string of cause and effect. We aren't really making decisions in life. Everything is predetermined, and consciousness and free will is just an illusion. But I do have to take a minute and ask, if consciousness is an illusion, who are we fooling? Just question for the masses there. So then below hard determinism, we have fatalism. And this is basically just hard determinism with emotional context. If everything is predetermined, then what's the point in anything? And everything's just, ultimately doomed to failure. And sometimes it even goes so far as to say there's a malevolent force behind our existence in the first place, driving us towards ultimate destruction, and all consciousness is basically just torture. It could be argued this should be below nihilism, but it doesn't really matter. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. Now, as a little bit of background, determinism was mostly a religious argument. It was a religious philosophy until about the 17th century and the Enlightenment. Arguments around determinism were almost entirely around the ramifications of the existence of a god or the gods and their influence over us. So if God is all-powerful, what is humanity's real role in creation? That's where these arguments centered around. It was around 1814 that Pierre-Simon Laplace gave us the cornerstone of what is today's secular argument for determinism. He postulated the idea that if, and that's a big if, we'll come back to that, if there was some kind of superintelligent entity that knew the position and momentum of every particle in the universe, that superintelligent entity could then know the entire past of what got us here and know the entire future. And if that's the case, then the universe is deterministic. This idea is called the Laplacian demon. I just have to again stop for a second. A superintelligent thing that knows the position momentum of every particle in the universe. How is this not God? How is this not at least a God? Seems like a semantic technicality. Just saying that if is doing a lot of work there. The point is that until we were gifted with the Laplacian demon, these ideas around determinism were not considered scientific at all. And no one would say it was, at least not with a straight face. But somehow after this thought experiment, determinism quickly became synonymous with rational scientific thinking. So before we move on now to kill this demon, I have 3 takeaways I want you to understand right now. Number 1, most of YouTube, with their clickbaity thumbnails that free will does not exist, and most of the podcasts you hear and the intellectual discussions center around this view of hard or soft determinism. And if you go back and watch these, you'll see that's kind of where they fall, and they also tend to kind of dither between the two, depending on how good the other side of the argument is. But that's what they're focused on. And just to make it harder to write me off as building a straw man argument, here's the advocates of determinism in their own words.
Because of everything from 1 second ago to millennia ago, all of these influences. And when you look at them, there's 2 key punchlines. The first one is when you look at sort of the amount of our behavior that all of those prior events encompass, what you conclude is we are nothing more than the sum of our biological luck, over which we had no control, and its interactions with the sum of our environmental luck, which we also had no control over.
It's like you are the totality of what brought you here. I mean, the universe has sort of just pushed you to this point in time, and the only thing you've got is your brain and its states, and that is based on your genes and the totality of environmental influences you as a system have had working on you up until this moment.
Deep down, we're all particles, and the laws that dictate the behavior of those particles are partly deterministic and partly random. This means that, to a big extent, what those particles do is a direct consequence of what happened earlier. That's the deterministic part. And then there are some quantum jumps on top of this, which are unpredictable and uncontrollable. And that's it. That's me, that's you, that's all of us.
So as you can see, exactly what we talked about. Number 2, most academics who argue for free will today take the compatibilist approach. They don't argue against determinism, they just argue that determinism and free will can coexist. That's the most prevalent argument today for free will. It's what a lot of people thought I was going to talk about, and they also tend to really like the quantum mechanics argument stuff, and I'm not doing that either. We'll explain why later. I am not a compatibilist. And I think this particular viewpoint only exists because academics are often too afraid of conflict. The fatalistic and nihilistic proponents of determinism, they're normally not the thought leaders. They exist mostly in YouTube comments, Reddit forums, and of course, Meta's mission statement. And number 3, I am not arguing for anything on this list. I'm not libertarianism, I'm not compatibilism, I'm obviously not any of the determinisms. I am arguing for something completely new, which, if you are a regular viewer of this channel, you should know to expect by now. So right off the bat, from the Laplacian demon to hearing it straight from the horse's mouth earlier, Determinism is based on this cornerstone idea that everything is this classical linear chain of cause and effect stretching all the way from the beginning to the end. So why do I confidently claim this is not a scientific idea? Well, I'm going to start with the low-hanging fruit and work my way up. So what I'm about to cover may be very familiar to some of determinism's more master debaters. And if you've heard some of this before, feel free to skip ahead, but I promise we will get to some new stuff. First of all, we have a word association problem. The majority of physics works from what we call deterministic equations. This is a mathematical term, so mathematical determinism. It's when we have an equation where if you have all the variables on the left, then you know all the variables on the right. Of course, there's also differential equations, which go both ways. Yeah, but the concept's still the same. Here's the problem. This is a very simple mechanical definition. And it's very different from what most people think of when they hear the word determinism. What most people think of is practical determinism, which means the idea that if I have enough information, I can predict what's going to happen indefinitely. And that everything is going to have this very predictable way of, working out. And it seems like those are the same, but if you think about it, those are very different. One was not meant to have greater implications. The other one has a lot of implications. So we're confusing those two. Today's math has evolved to serve engineering and industry. So our math is very good for making things that don't explode on accident and making things that explode on purpose when we want them to. The problem is almost all of our results in modern mathematics are approximations that are just good enough for whatever the task is at hand. In truth, our ability to produce mathematical parity with the real world is extremely limited and has a lot of problems. First of all, there's a big pie hole in our ability to do that. And it's pi. You know what that is. The problem is we can't completely solve pi. And however far we go out in decimal points, it's still not completely solved, and there's always this hanging unknown at the end. Now again, most determinists would write that off as, oh, that's just a problem of, precision or accuracy. But here's the thing, we have a lot of reasons to know that no matter when you choose to stop trying to calculate, no matter how many decimal points you pick, it still matters. You probably know of this and have heard it under the term chaos theory, which again is another pop science term that not only fails but undercuts the real significance of what was actually discovered. This term came from the discovery of something called the Lorentz attractor. And basically, a professor of meteorology from MIT around the 1960s, his name was Edward Lorenz, so Lorentz attractor, he was trying to create a system for predicting the weather. And he created these incredibly sophisticated models that, to his surprise, would show an incredible difference over time if the starting variables had discrepancies of even 4 to 6 decimal places. And upon seeing this, he said, this is like trying to count for the beating wing of a butterfly in Brazil, later causing a tornado in Texas. That's how minuscule he thought the change was, but then seeing the equation move over time, it made a huge difference. And at this point, since most of my older viewers are thinking of this clip anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and play it.
Still not clear on chaos.
It simply deals with predictability in complex systems. The shorthand is the butterfly effect. A butterfly can flap its wings in Peking, and in Central Park you get rain instead of sunshine.
This isn't something we just see in big weather models. We see it in lots of things. Another place that we see it is very popular, you've probably heard of it, called the three-body problem. There's also the double swinging pendulum. There's the Duffing? the Duffing oscillator. I could go on. These are all problems of what we consider chaotic equations. That's a real name. It is officially known in math as chaotic equations. And this is what I mean by confusing terms. These equations, from a mathematical standpoint, are still technically deterministic equations, but practically we cannot use them to determine or predetermine the outcome. Now, again, I know determinists watching this are still but if and thinking about this is just a matter of precision or sophistication. So let me cover the first axiom we're going to review today. These aren't existing axioms, I'm making them for this video, but these are the axioms I'm going to center this around. Complex physical systems, given enough time, will always exceed the grasp of any level of conceivable precision in a mathematical model for prediction. So that's one, we'll have some more. In the end, this comes down to unsolvable relationships. And pi is one of them, but there's more. There's many times where we have these variables that we just can't finish. And they leave this gaping hole that means we cannot indefinitely predict the outcome of something. But here's the thing. So first, this is not my only argument for determinism, and it does not prove determinism does not exist. What it does is it shows it is unprovable, and therefore it is not a scientific idea. Arguably rational, arguably logical, but scientific? No. At some point, it still requires an act of faith to believe in. It is a choice. You choose to believe determinism. Now, if you really want to get your head around how difficult it is, even with technology today, to predict complex systems, I recommend you look into something called John Conway's Game of Life. Now, this is a rabbit hole, so I do not want to get into it in this video. I have in the description, in the companion article, links so that you can go look into it. But basically, it is a very simple computer simulation with very basic rules. And even this one little simulation has proven that it is incapable for us to find an algorithm to completely predict its behavior. It is in small little things that is, temporary movements or things that is predictable, but ultimately the game as a whole, we have never been able to find an algorithm to predict its behavior. But unlike what people call chaos theory, the game of life is unpredictable for a very different reason. And that's what I'm most excited to talk about today. Okay, so now we get to the good stuff. And I bet a lot of you out there, well, I know a lot of you out there, thought I was going to pull the whole quantum mechanics thing. We have superpositions and we can't tell what something is until we measure it, and maybe all of that gives us room for free will. No, because I've already spent 4 hours debunking all of that. So obviously I've kind of painted myself in a corner there. Can't fall back to quantum mechanics if I'm also spending time talking about how it's a load of BS. So that's okay, because I have something called general systems and complexity. While particle physics has been the cool kid on the block for the last 100 years, general systems and complexity is going to be the thing that your grandkids pretend to understand. It represents the biggest unexplored frontier right now in, I'm going to say, physics. In a nutshell, this entire field has grown out of our observations of something called emergence and an apparent self-organizing nature of complex systems. Emergence is a term we give to anything where its features, its functions, its properties are not apparent or attributable to any of its component parts. Or in other words, anywhere in nature where a thing or a system is just more than the sum of its parts. In systems theory, it works like this. So we'll have system 1 and system 2. And each of these systems have their own functions, they have their own way of behaving, and they have their own properties. But if we now get them in a situation where they are interacting with each other and exchanging information or energy or matter, Now, System 1 and System 2 become components of System 3.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
And System 3 now has behavior and functions and properties that neither System 1 or 2 had. That is what we call an emergent system. Now, I'm trying to squeeze a lot into this video, so I don't want to dive too deeply into any specific example of emergence, so I'm just going to give you a quick list so that you can feel free to look this up and learn more about it later if you don't already know. Ant colonies, flocking birds, cooling fish, immune response, gene regulatory networks, ecosystems, organ function, bioluminescent flashing, phase transitions, crystals, convection cells, sand dunes, tornadoes, chemical oscillations, tide dynamics, galaxy and star formation, ambiogenesis, 4 soccer moms at a 4-way stop, potluck dinner, buffet lines, that mysterious traffic jam where you get to the end and there's nothing there. Now, out of that list, the examples I gave currently fall into 2 categories. One is weak emergence and the other is strong emergence. So weak emergence means there's some reasoning that we can figure out as to why the emergent system had the behaviors and features it did from the component parts. And strong emergence is when we look at the emergent system and basically go, what the fuck? In science! Now, the game of life that I mentioned earlier actually has both these components. But here's the really fun part about strong emergence. Strong emergence is where we get something called qualia. And qualia means properties or features of something that we cannot quantify and yet still have an impact on its behavior or surrounding systems. Easy examples of qualia are beauty, aroma, the catchiness of a tune, the softness of a velvet blanket, and that strange feeling of dissonance when you see corporations on TV honoring fallen soldiers by offering sales on mattresses. While these things can be subjective to some degree, they are also inexplicably consistent. For example, that monkey at the zoo isn't throwing its poop at you because he thinks it's a gift. Disgust is a qualia shared pretty universally among species, and it's a property that arrives from lots and lots of interactions among disparate and not directly influencing complex systems. The point here is that not only can you not predict the behavior of a complex system indefinitely, you can't predict the emergent properties that come from the interactions of complex systems at all. This brings me to my second proposed axiom for this video. The future state of any physical process can only be determined in a closed system for a limited amount of time. Now, why is that so important for this debate? Because open systems have their own unique properties and sets of behavior, which we observe, that cannot be observed in a closed state, which means that anytime we create a closed system, we are inherently cut off from observing the natural behavior of the universe. And therefore, we cannot extrapolate what we observe in closed systems to how open systems behave, ruining the logic of if I can do it with this much, I can do it with this much. However, I admit again, this does not disprove determinism. It simply shows another leap of faith that has to be taken to accept determinism as true. Since emergent properties do not have identifiably direct, linear, or even physical causes, then how can they ever be determined? But I'm not done yet. If the universe is not determinable, then many would argue that means it's random. And if it's random, then there's still no room for free will. Well, good news. The universe isn't random either. So, within this same field of study we've been discussing, general systems and complexity, we have discovered another amazing property about open systems and the universe. They are self-organizing. This is something we observe, but we struggle to define. So I'm going to give you 3 definitions. So for our first definition, and all 3 of these have a purpose, we'll get to it as we talk. A self-organizing system is one where overall order and coherent patterns arise spontaneously without a central source of control. Definition number 2. A self-organizing system is one that maintains thermodynamic equilibrium by importing and dissipating energy in exchange with its environment. Definition number 3. A self-organizing system is dynamic and automatically adapts its structure by adjusting relationships between its internal parts to maintain a stable state. Now, the reason there's many definitions of self-organizing is because, again, it's a growing field of study, and also it's defined differently by kind of what lens you're looking at it through, whether it's a physics lens or a lens within the context of emergent systems, and so on and so forth. So that's why it's a little hard to have one definition. These definitions come from objective observations that we see in the universe. We see them in galaxies, we see them in ecosystems, we see them in insect colonies. Any open system that exchanges energy and matter with its environment. And because of that, we know these are consistent properties of emergent complex systems. Now, outside of those definitions, there are some more behaviors that we've observed, and I want to talk about those. A self-organizing system evolves towards equilibrium. And so basically what this means is if a system has too much chaos or disruption, it can disintegrate altogether. This is obvious. You can see this in a Jenga tower or a house of cards, or potentially our government. We'll leave that alone for now. What is more counterintuitive and much more interesting about self-organizing systems is that the most predictable, unchanging state of a system, so the most just absolutely stable and predictable it is, that is the point at which it is the most sensitive and vulnerable to destabilization, meaning even a small fluctuation can topple the entire system. So the ideal state for a self-organizing system is actually something we've called the edge of chaos, or the critical boundary, which I gotta give kudos to, because that's probably some of the coolest sounding shit scientists have come up with in a long time. This means the system has just enough chaos and just enough stability to maintain a constant cycling of adaptation and reorganization. It's what keeps the system healthy. And while these principles come from observing systems in nature, you can probably see this makes sense just in your day-to-day life. For example, if you go to one of those stuffy get-togethers, like a ball or a lot of weddings, and there is this strict expectation of etiquette. Everyone has specific rules for how they need to behave and what's expected and what happens next. It takes very little to derail the whole thing, which is why everyone tries to keep their drunk uncle away from the reception. But if you go to a crazy house party, the crazier stuff you do, the more it just fits in. So you can see just in day-to-day life that a system with a little bit of chaos is so much more capable of handling change and disruption than ones that are incredibly predictable. The existence of the universe and life in general relies on nature's ability to be both unpredictable and self-organizing. So this is not determinism, nor is it random. And one of the things I'm very disappointed about is I cannot find a good word in English to really replace our expectations with. English, as I've covered before in my other video, our language in general has a huge influence over how we think, and English is full of terms that are extreme and opposed to each other. We think in terms of these dramatic opposites and what I would call false choices. So hence our debate, determinism or free will. So in looking for a word, the only one I found was in Japanese, and it's wabi-sabi. So Technical direct translation of wabi-sabi means something like finding the beautiful in the imperfect, but it's a much deeper philosophy than that. And again, I don't have time to go into it too deep in this video, so I do recommend that you look up later and all the things that are kind of tucked into that phrase and thinking. So the nature of our universe, it isn't random. It isn't deterministic. It isn't chaotic. It's wabi-sabi. It's really fun to say. But if I had to pick an English word, and I was forced to just pick one, the one I would think that comes the closest, although still not great, is playful. The universe is playful. And I don't mean like, oh, a cute kitten playing with a ball of yarn playful. I more mean like a jaguar juggling knives playful. Like, yeah, it's still kind of cute, but you ain't gonna pet it. Here's the thing. Self-organization is a property we observe in open systems in nature, and this property does not exist in a closed system. It means that anytime we look at a limited system, we are closing out a big part of how the universe functions. So this brings me to my third and most important axiom of the video. The nature of the universe cannot be observed in a closed system. The general overarching argument of determinism, starting with the Laplacian demon, comes to this: a small closed system is predictable and has deterministic behavior for a limited amount of time, so therefore, larger open systems must also be predictable over eternity. Wrong. We fundamentally know, with the evidence available to us at the moment, that is false. And while we still have a lot to learn, a lot, can't stress that enough, in the field of general systems and complexity, we know enough to know that is true. So, to determinists, I say, nothing. You get nothing.
You lose. Good day, sir.
But I'm still not done yet. So, can I truly disprove the existence of determinism? No, you can't prove a negative. But that's the point of scientific discipline. We're supposed to prove something exists, not demand everyone else proves it doesn't. I can't technically prove that there are no more Tyrannosaurus rexes walking around, because unless you have eyeballs on every single part of the planet all at once, you can't definitively say, no, I absolutely know 100% it's not there. He could be hiding behind a tree. But rational people also know, yeah, we're pretty sure there aren't any around. That's pretty solid because we don't have any proof. There is one. That's how science works, okay? All the arguments of determinism are leaps of faith that say we can use inductive reasoning, the worst kind of reasoning, by the way, to extrapolate from small examples into large overall examples. And even if you say, but Chris, maybe the universe is just one giant closed system, I can say, you're just being annoying and you're missing the point. No, we don't know that. You can guess it, but it doesn't help. Even worse though, these arguments from evangelical determinists, and I don't mean evangelical like, the religious thing. I mean evangelical as in feeling compelled to spread it around. They are disturbingly similar to conspiracy theorists and cultists. Let me give you an example. When you talk to a flat earther and you say things like, well, what about those images that we shot from space that show the earth is round? Oh, well, they made those up on computers. Well, what about the motions of bodies in space? Oh, well, that's just a giant projection screen that they're playing this on to fool us. Technically, yes, that may be possible. But the point is you have to prove it. Okay, just because something is technical, yes, that could happen. And that's what is so frustrating about people who come up with nonsensical ideas. They are impossible to persuade because they demand you prove a negative. So likewise, when you're talking to someone who's very passionate about determinism, you say, you cannot predict the behavior of this system. Well, but if we had all the variables, then we could. Okay, you can't actually solve this equation with precision enough to predict it. Yes, but if we could, do you see the similarities? It's a constant moving of the goalpost, one up at a time, to make a bigger and bigger if that we have no way of ever proving, testing, or verifying. So here's the thing I know from experience, and you can look around and see that it's true. When people take up this kind of reasoning, it means they want to believe something. It is important to them. That means there is some kind of emotion tied up in it. I do not say determinism teeters on religion because I'm trying to be insulting. Okay, I'm having a little fun, but I mean, it genuinely seems to be a religious idea more than a scientific one. People want answers for the how and the why of existence. We have a kind of desperation to feel like we understand why and how everything's here. It helps us sleep at night. But you know what's better than knowing? Not knowing. Because if you don't know something, then that means someday you might know a little more about it. So, instead of trying to put the universe in a little box that makes sense and feels good, instead, why not try looking at the universe with a sense of wonder, or whimsy, or dare I say, wabi-sabi? Now, my goal with this series is to focus on one topic or element of free will at a time, and obviously this video has been directly addressing scientific determinism. I haven't addressed the psychological, neurological, or biological influences, and if I am going to follow my own advice here, I need to prove, or at least give evidence for, free will existing. So that is going to be the focus of the next video. In the meantime, I hope you can get some good sleep, never stop learning, and I'll see you next time.